What's up, guys? Welcome back to Tidal Gardens. We have a lot to cover in this episode. The past few weeks have been pretty productive. We go through these long spells of not getting a lot done and then sudden bursts of activity. I don't exactly remember what we did in our last update, but since then, we've added in a lot of fish into the existing system that we have here. This is called Set A. We've gotten 2 new show tanks. These are 250-gallon show tanks. And we have now started to fully plumb out and leak test Set B. So that's the kind of the general overview, but let's hop into some of the details. Okay, since it's right here, let's talk about these 2 show tanks. Each of these measure 60 inches long by 36 inches wide, and they are about 26 inches tall. Remember when I was telling you in other past episodes how anything above 24 inches can be a little bit of a maintenance nightmare? That's kind of what we're seeing here. I think visually, a 26-inch, 28-inch, 30-inch tank is outstanding. I love the look that extra depth gives you, but every inch after 24 inches, you'll feel it. You'll definitely feel it. Probably to get to the bottom of this tank regularly to do servicing, we're probably going to need a little bit of a step stool or something like that. But I'm very happy with how these guys came out. They were made by Ocean Life Aquariums. I know that in another video we had talked about having these tanks delivered, and a lot of people were asking where we had them built. It was Derrick at Ocean Life Aquariums. I'll put his contact info in the description below, so you can check that out if you're looking for a custom-made tank. He's out of Orlando, and he usually works with like the local fish stores in that area. So he doesn't usually go direct to consumer, but he said it was okay to share his contact info, so I will do that for him. As for what we are planning to do with these aquariums, it is a little up in the air right now. We were originally thinking of possibly doing like a seahorse tank with a lot of gorgonians, but then I was like, is that going to be a total maintenance nightmare? It's going to be a species-specific tank of some sort. Perhaps a tank just full of like bubble tip anemones, that sort of thing. It's a blank palette right now, blank slate. Nothing we have to decide on just yet. Again, there's 2 of them, so even if like we have a couple of different ideas, we can try each one separately. One thing that is different about this tank versus pretty much every other system here is that this guy does not have closed loops. All the other ones are pre-drilled, usually on the bottom or on the side, to accept some Ecotech Vectra L2 circulation pumps. We decided to go away from that in these just in case we wanted to do something like seahorses or do something like anemones that might get kind of caught in some kind of vacuum. We pretty much are going to be relying on the 2 returns, and if we need to get some additional flow, we might look at some power heads. But the way that we have this guy plumbed up with the 2 1-inch returns, we can really crank flow through this thing. I plan to use those VCA wave makers to kind of create like a variable flow through this, but whole thing, work in progress. As far as the lights go, I have never used Orphix before. Pretty much this entire facility is Ecotech Radion, and next door we primarily use T5, although we're slowly transitioning to LED. No real good reason for doing that, I guess, as the older T5 fixtures just started to fail one by one, because we were using these very inexpensive Amazon fixtures that were about like $100 shipped. Can't really beat that, right? They worked great out of the greenhouse. They're practically disposable. They've lasted 3 years, so thumbs up for that. But we never really went through and changed out all the bulbs or anything like that in this entire time. So eventually, like, the bulbs are super dim. The fixtures are slowly feeling the greenhouse. As they die, we're slowly replacing them with some higher quality LED fixtures. Anyway, I have not played around too much with these Orphix, so I can't really talk about how easy they are to control or anything like that. I was mainly curious to try the Amazonas fixtures. These are the Atlantics. So most times when you see like a home aquarium, you're going to be seeing Atlantics. but they also make these Amazonas fixtures, which are more like spotlights for public aquariums. And I can show you what we have going on with the tank with those lights on there. So since I was already going to be ordering Amazonas lights, I decided to go and get some Atlantics just to see if we would get any type of different growth or coloration of corals versus the Ecotech Radions. We probably have, I don't know, like 60, 70, 80 something fixtures of the Radions. This is like more experimental than anything at this point. One thing I am very happy with this installation is we were able to do a whole lot in the way of mounting and wire management. So each of these guys has its own power cord coming off of it, and we decided to use this aluminum T-slot. So pretty much all of the aluminum T-slot that we're using now comes from Alufab. If you want them to build you a stand, if you want them to design you, I don't know, like a workstation area, like whatever you need. When it comes to like custom aluminum work, we're getting it through them now. And if you mention Tidal Gardens, they will give you 10% off. So there you have it. I will put their contact information in the description below. As I was saying, what we do still have left to go is the wire management of this guy, which we will be using that J channel. The wiring will go up along the wall, and the power supplies are going to be located on the back side of this beam. Pretty much all of set B is going to require a whole lot of cable management left to go, because ideally the look that we're going for is to have everything be wide open and hiding nothing, but still looking super clean, which is a challenge in itself, because most times, you know, people would just put all their equipment down into a stand, close the doors, and it's out of sight. But it's a whole other challenge to leave everything open and being able to see how everything works, yet not have it look like a giant snake pit of wiring. All right, next up, we are looking at the Peninsula Show Tank. This guy here is pretty slick. It took a while to get him all plumbed up. We've got our Amazonas fixtures. These are Amazonas 960s. Each of these 4 pucks that you see in those fixtures are pretty much custom. You can pick out a custom blend of different LED pucks. You can pick out the beam angle. Because of like the height that they were installed, I was thinking I wanted like the narrowest beam angle, which is 15 degrees, and I didn't want a whole lot of light spill. We did a par testing at the bottom. So by the way, if you think that these are kind of dim, they are. They're probably on at like 10% right now. Obviously, there's not a whole lot going on in this tank. We don't need to be cranking these up. But when we did crank them all up to like 100%, at the very bottom, we were getting about 1300 par. This is 24 inches underwater here, and there's about 4 feet to the light. But when you move the light sensor, there was like too much of a drop off between the different zones. So it would drop off, and I'm just kind of making up some numbers here. It would start off at 1300. It would drop off to maybe like 1000 or so before it would ramp back up to 1300 again under the next spotlight. So when I talked to Orphic about that, they suggested replacing the optics. So I don't know exactly which beam angles that they have. I think they've got like a 30 degree, they've got a 60 degree. I think they might even have a 90 degree optic to like really, really cover spread. We might play with swapping out some of the reflectors in there to something with a larger beam angle just to kind of like spread out the intensity a little bit more. I'm actually okay with the coverage. But yeah, getting a little bit more of like an even performance might do the inhabitants some good. As for the inhabitants, we're probably going to be doing, like I said, a mixed reef in this tank. And I wanted to see about using this height, perhaps to grow mangroves or something like that. We haven't exactly decided, but we have a lot of flexibility with this system. Now, in my SPS Show Tank, which we will talk about a little bit later, we have closed loops in those. But that tank has its back to the wall. We were able to put the closed loops directly into the side of the aquarium. Here, overflow boxes on that side, and you have the full peninsula. So This guy is plumbed very similar to how our propagation systems are, where we have two internal closed loops going through the bottom of the tank. Now, in the other systems, they are about half this size. They didn't need quite as much horsepower. So the closed loops for the Frag systems are Vectra L2s. Here, in basically a tank that's double the size, I didn't think that we were going to get quite the flow through the main body of the tank. We're using Vectras. So I decided to bite the bullet. And these are now running with Abyss A200s. And I can pretty much tell you that with two closed-loop Abyss A200s, cranked at 100%, you could probably pin fish to the glass with this. It is insanely strong. Like right now, I think the pumps are just running at 30% or so. You can still see plenty of water movement, but if I were to crank it up, yeah, it would be to the point where it would be pushing coral colonies around on the ground. Anyway, at least I know that I'm covered for the intensity of flow. The only thing that I need to worry about now is perhaps the flow direction as well as the variability. And again, I'm going to try out those VCA adapters. They go right on the end of the lock line. We've only tried 4 of them so far, but we'll try a few more because so far everything that I've seen has been pretty impressive. Last thing to note, as far as the intake and the outputs, I plan to pretty much bury these things in aquascape, so you shouldn't be able to see hardly any of it once this tank is fully aquascaped. So anyway, this guy literally got filled up yesterday. So this is all still RO. We are leak testing everything. There are a million points that could possibly leak, and sometimes leaks form days after the fact. So far, fingers crossed, so good, there's no leaks, but come prepared for anything. That's what I've learned over the years. Next up, we have set B. This is our second main grow out system. Hopefully we're going to get a total of 4 different systems in here. Set C is not even designed yet, but we have both A and B pretty much with water running. So again, this is all RO water right now. This is just to kind of clean out any kind of things that might leach out, as well as doing some fairly safe leak testing. There were a couple of leaks in this. You can never tell what is going to potentially leak when you put something like this together, because there's only, I don't know, 1,000 places where it could be leaking. So there's just a couple of bulkheads that need to get tightened down, nothing really too severe. There was one thing in the sump that was kind of concerning. The cool thing about actually working with a real plumber is that you learn a whole bunch of new plumbing techniques that you just never really thought of. There was one particular thing in there that involved the return pump, and I was I don't know how we're going to tighten down this leak, and sure enough, there was a way to do it. So okay, good to know. Anyhow, so far, since we've kind of gone over it a couple times, there haven't been any additional leaks, but I'm really excited that this entire system, for the most part, is all plumbed up. Once our little water test is over, we can start turning this all into salt water and then pretty much start cycling. Generally speaking, we're going to wait about 1 to 2 months for the cycle to complete. Yeah, it's been a long time coming for this guy. Again, you see Ecotech Vectra closed loops. There's 2 in each of these tanks, and all the lighting is pretty much Radeon Gen 4s. Up to this point, we've been talking mainly about our empty aquariums, but we actually do have coral in here. This tank has been running now, System A has been running now several months now, I would guess. We've gotten most of the corals out of quarantine and into this tank. We go through a pretty lengthy quarantine process, and it is crazy what still makes it through quarantine after all the dipping, after the 70 days and everything. And if we do see anything, it gets kicked right back out into quarantine. So anyway, we're primarily in this tank growing a lot of LPS, lots and lots and lots of LPS. We've got one system over there that has some SPS in there, but it's only a handful of some of our nicer acro colonies, things like that. But mostly this stuff is the type of corals that we kind of plan to propagate here long term. So it's a lot of Duncans, a lot of Favia, micromusa, that type of thing, and calastria. And this system right now, it's going through a lot of its early phase issues. I don't know, like if issues is a good word to describe it. Issues is a great word to describe it. There's weird algae, and there is no nutrient to speak of, which is so bizarre. Like, we can't get a nitrate or phosphate reading, and I do not consider that a good thing. Hopefully, now that we've added in some fish, we feed a little bit more aggressively in this system. I'm hoping that as the system ages, we're kind of going to creep up the nitrate and phosphate levels a little bit, and I can already tell that the nuisance algae is kind of subsiding. Most of it. We're going to talk about the SPS Show Tank in a little bit. Yeah, I would say that like the newbie algae issues are kind of handling themselves at this point. Once we get a few more of the herbivores through quarantine, that'll help. But yeah, the corals themselves, I'm super happy with. Kind of the frustrating thing about coral farming is you can have 90-something% of everything do great, but it's like the one or two things that aren't doing well, and those are the ones that they were the only ones you cared about to begin with. So for example, we got a couple of those amazeballs, Goniopora. One of them just was never happy from the beginning, and unfortunately it died. And the last one is kind of looking rather upset. I'm like, that was literally the only coral I cared about. And of course, that's the one. But practically everything else is doing great. So, got to take the wins with the losses, I guess, right? Ew, what are we looking at? So this is our SPS Show Tank. It's ballpark 500, 600 gallons, something like that. We have just got going with the aquascape in here. And you're seeing what pretty much always happens when you start up brand new, like dead rock. There's so much stuff like built up in these rocks that algae just loves to go crazy over. So we're seeing a lot of like the nuisance stuff here. This piece was added in a little bit later. You can see that it's not grown in all of that stuff just yet. But we've started to add in more and more herbivores, and I can already see like little patches where the herbivores are doing their work and kind of breaking out all that algae. And I expect this process is going to take a little bit of a while to fully go through its paces, because effectively these rocks are like nutrient batteries, and until they're kind of expended, there's going to be plenty of stuff to feed this algal bloom. So even when you see like the bare bottom here, and you see like the tufts of algae that are growing, that's where just some residual like dust from the aquascape kind of collected after it gets blown around by the closed loops and everything like that, and it just settles there. And just from the like kind of this a little dust substrate settling, that's where the algae grows. So it's pretty clear it's coming from the rocks. Now, this rock that you see over here, we even soaked him in RO for weeks. And sure enough, like you can see like all this white stuff come out in the container, and still he's going to be able to grow algae for a while. But like I said, herbivores, just regular old maintenance, and time, this sort of thing I expect will take care of itself. Now, as far as like the shapes of everything that we're going for here, we decided to make our own like custom rock work using Marco rocks, some Glue Masters glue, and Carib Sea sand. I'll put a link in the description as to the technique that we do as far as, you know, kind of creating these types of rockscapes. It turns out to be super easy. It just requires like the right materials, a little bit of patience, but pretty much to set up this type of shape, it goes very quickly. Now, as far as like the shapes themselves, I'm looking to build a structure upon which all the corals will grow from. So ideally, none of this stuff here you'll be able to see as far as like the actual rock work. In a perfect world, this entire thing, I want it to be very sinewy and very airy. So there's a lot of rings, a lot of like open spaces. I expect that over time, like large SPS colonies will fill in those gaps, but still allow a lot of like water movement and everything like that to go through. But I'm not putting any corals in here until this algae stuff goes away. What's crazy about this system is the fact that we're running all of it basically off of a single return pump. Right now we're looking at set B. There are 4 300-gallon Frag tanks, a 500-ish gallon sump when it's full. There is a 250-gallon show tank and a 600-gallon show tank. All of that is running off of a single return pump. All of those are getting more than ample flow, and that pump is not even running at 100%. Right now, we have it cranked at about 70%, and that Abyss A400 basically ignores head pressure, doesn't care. As far as like the price of those things, it is astronomically expensive. Let's not even sugarcoat it. It's one of the most expensive pumps I've ever even seen, but man, as for the performance of them, ridiculously outstanding. All right, guys, that pretty much does it for this update. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time. Happy reefing. Take care.